3 вересня починає.
It's September 3rd. Ukraine Media Center starts its operation. My name is Svetlana Cheprenko, and now we'll be talking about current situation in the borders and preparation to potential threats. Joining us in the studio is Andrii Demchenko, spokesperson for the State Bodyguard Service of Ukraine. Good morning, Mr. Andrii. Good morning. So let's start with the situation in the northern borders. We are curious about the border with Belarus. It's been for some time that we observe concentration of the troops and material in the border of Belarus. And does this concentration create any threats for Ukraine? Well, talking about the borderline, all of the components of our security and defense forces exercise full control over the borderline. We don't document any non-standard situations or provocative actions. On top of that, we don't observe any movements of material or personnel of the Belarusian armed forces close to our border, but that axis remains of threat to us. Ukraine basically poses no threat to Belarus, as we can see them putting responsibility of Ukraine as if it's us who concentrate our forces here, which pose threat to Belarus. We remember what happened back in 2022. We remember the rhetorics of Belarus during all this time of the full-scale invasion, and we remember that Belarus remains in the orbit of influence of Russia. That's why we have to retain strong defense positions along the borderline to make sure that our guys who defend that axis, including the Bodyguard Service of Ukraine, National Guard, Armed Forces of Ukraine, have opportunities to cover, have opportunities to exercise full-fledged combat operations to repel any attack of any invaders who would attempt to enter our territory. So what's going on in the depth of Belarus? We keep track of all that events unfolding by our intelligence, using our intelligence to be able to respond properly to any situation developments. Well, I can say that there is material and personnel moving in the depth of Belarus, but we don't see any significant concentration there. Let me remind you that Belarus was keeping forces close to the border of Ukraine, but they were never moving real close, directly close to our border. So what is the situation in the Russian border? Do we observe any changes there? What is the situation with the enemy saboteur teams? Well, enemy's activity in terms of shellings is the everyday reality of Sumy, Chernihiv, and Kharkiv regions. Generally, within the month of August, our bodyguard units documented at least 2,500 shellings exercised by Russia using different types of weapons to inflict those strikes on the border and the areas close to the border, and the majority of shellings fall on the Sumy region. A lot of them is accounted for Kharkiv region and a little bit less in Chernihiv region. At the same time, talking about Sumy region, the enemy actively uses aviation to inflict strikes on that region. Also, we document the activity of enemies loitering drones to inflict strikes on the spots of concentration of our forces or the civilian infrastructure, because the strikes of the enemy on civilian infrastructure on residential area continues, thus confirming Russia's status as the terrorist country, because they continue inflicting strikes on civilian infrastructure, citizens who get killed and injured on a daily basis. Talking about the enemy's saboteur teams, their activity receded significantly in Sumy region, especially, but we cannot say that the enemy does not continue such activity. There is still sabotage, enemy's activity continuing in certain areas. So let's proceed to the western borders. Electronic queue has started working for the passenger buses. To what extent it will expedite the passage of the borders, and when will such option come into effect in all of the checkposts? For the time being, electronic queue, a project implemented by Ministry of Infrastructure in coordination with us and State Customs Service, currently covers 28 checkposts. Those are the directions where the transporters have to register on the EQ. Until yesterday, until 16 o'clock, the slotting was working on 4 of those 28 checkposts, basically meaning that every transporter had their time identified when they are able to cross the border. Yesterday, starting from the 12 o'clock, the EQ started working in slotting mode in 20 out of 28 checkposts, which means that the buses can cross free time slots to cross the border. That is all managed by the operators. It will standardize this crossing of the border, and it will not create the concentration of the buses that come to the border at the same time. It was real pressing during the summertime period when the passenger flow was quite intense and the number of buses crossing the border within a day, within working days, it was 475 to 500 buses, and during weekends it was from 530 to 550. And before implementation of that EQ on those checkposts, there could be a concentration of 10 to 20 buses at the same time. Sometimes the checkposts were even empty because during that time none of the transporters was wishing to cross the border. Basically, the work is going on, and hopefully in other directions, and the biggest are the checkposts in the border with Poland, where the slotting mode is not yet implemented. This standard will be implemented soon, and it will help the people to cross the border quicker. And a little bit more information about the crossing of the borders by the citizens. What was the number of the citizens crossing the border this year, and how does it compare to their year before? Well, the passenger flow is quite intense. For example, starting from the beginning of the year, within the first 8 months, 23.7 million people have crossed the border. The biggest numbers were accounting for summer. For example, in July, 3.3 million persons have crossed the border. Sorry, in June 3.3, in July 3.7, and 3.9 in August. It was all related to the vacation period. People could cross the border to solve their problems, like for recreation purposes, and the biggest number of those who cross the border are the women or the foreigners, and the males account for a smaller fraction. For example, for the latest period, the number of people who are entitled to cross the border, whether entering or exiting Ukraine, is infinitesimal compared to the total number of passenger flow, because during the summer period it was maybe 120 people crossing the border. During weekends, the index could fluctuate from 130 to 150,000. And for example, yesterday it fell to 9,500 persons per day. So basically, starting with the beginning of the new curriculum year, with the beginning of autumn, the passenger flow will continue staying at the same level, but comparing to the summer, it decreased significantly. The June was characterized by the fact that the exit was prevailing over the entrance to Ukraine. Meanwhile, in July and August, the picture was quite the opposite. Well, with the beginning of the curriculum year, many students started leaving Ukraine in the end of August and in the first days of September, were all of them able to leave, or were there violations documented among the students? Well, basically, the category of the citizens studying abroad is not a ground to cross the border. That rule is in effect starting from the year 2022, and the students who study abroad are not entitled to cross the border. Well, talking about the illegal border crossing, does the situation change in terms of numbers, and do you continue documenting such cases so far? Well, unfortunately, such cases is the everyday reality of our border guard service teams, who continue detaining violators who try to cross the border in illegal manner. Comparing, for example, August with July, we observe some dynamics of decrease, but before that we were observing some increase in numbers. So talking in average numbers, there is no drastic decrease, but unfortunately, there is no drastic increase, but unfortunately, there is no drastic decrease. At the same time, the biggest number of violators were detained in the border with Romania and Moldova. Also, the figures are smaller in the borders with Hungary and Slovakia, and the smallest number of detentions is documented in the border with Poland. Talking about the green section of the border beyond the checkposts, but the Polish direction is characterized by the multiple attempts of illegal border crossing in the checkposts, where the people try to use the counterfeit documents, or they try to hide in their vehicles, or to bribe the inspectors of the State Border Guard Service. Thank you very much, Mr. Andrii. Do we have any questions from the floor to our guests? You can ask your questions in case you have any. Well, should I pass the mic to you? Well, in case we don't have any questions on the floor, thank you, Mr. Andrii. Let me remind you that joining us was Andrii Demchenko, the spokesperson of the State Border Guard Service of Ukraine, and Ukraine Media Center will continue at 12:30, and we will be talking about the consequences of the enemy's strikes on the energy infrastructure and rolling power shutdowns. Stay tuned.